Hi, I'm Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing Live, and I'm broadcasting to you today from Salt Lake City area in the state of Utah, and I am excited to be with you. Okay, so today the title of the broadcast is somewhat of a repeat, I've got a really great question to share with you that I received this week, and it's kind of the essence of singing. And so I want to be able to cover this again. We'll go in a little bit more detail on how to strengthen the voice above the break. That's like above the first bridge. Awesome. Well, welcome to this live broadcast. These have been I've gotten a lot of good feedback on them. I hope that they're helpful and useful for you. I am going to just talk about the topic today before I get too far into question and answer. So let me share with you this question that I received, and you can see it now, I believe, on the screen. It's from Rick Anthony, and he says, and this is really a great. I really felt like this was a great question. Unfortunately, it seems a lot of these videos don't come close to providing, not hating on anybody or their vocal coaching, information on how to strengthen the voice beyond F, F sharp, and G for men. And ladies, that would be for you A above middle C, B flat, B, and C. That's the first bridge for the men and the women, to a point where it sounds just like chest voice and is actually usable in singing. It's frustrating. One would think it isn't possible to do that, but take singers like David Phelps, who clearly aren't just belting out in chest voice, so it appears to be possible to train your disconnected voice to sound as strong as chest after the first bridge break. So please, coach, if you have any ideas on what it takes to strengthen that range of the voice, F sharp all the way up to C to D for guys, and I'm thinking he's talking about the C, high C, which would be the C5, D5, I'd love to know. Anything lower is not really a challenge, as it is anatomically within connected voice range, and anything sung above but tonally softer is usually just head voice sung as resonantly as a singer can. So a really, really great question. Now, this was on a YouTube video, and so I responded. It's a great question, Ricky, and I don't think the answer is the same for every singer. And so I want to share with you a little bit about my own personal history, because I think it's pretty indicative of of what we all face as singers. Now, I can remember when so there's a couple things that happen. There's this arc of development for singers. The arc of development is basically when you come from almost not being able to do anything to being able to do a lot. And the time element is different for all of us. There's a book by Cesare called Voice of the Mind. And within the first few pages, he talks about how every voice is a law unto itself. Every larynx is a law unto itself. That means that for every student that comes through my door as a teacher, I have to assume that every single person is going to respond differently to the exercises and to the information. So there's how we process information. There's how we I got to turn off my monitor here. It was very distracting to me. It's how we process information. It's how we hear it. It's how we feel it. It's just how we learn. We all learn differently. And so that means that the arc of development for each singer and each singer, a student of singing, is different. So for me, I could not sing through the first bridge, and I was very discouraged. Many of you have already heard my story, but I couldn't sing above the E, above middle C, and wouldn't try it. I just knew that I couldn't do it. I could break into falsetto or yell it or scream it, and it was, I didn't want to embarrass myself around my friends, or, I couldn't do it on stage for sure. So the first major thing for me was getting through the bridge. That was like a miracle. It was just like, I couldn't believe it. To be able to sing, ah, instead of breaking into falsetto, ah. Well, that's the high A. Excuse me. I'm kind of froggy today. I didn't think it was possible. And so when I experienced it and began to do it, and like you've kind of indicated, Ricky, it's one thing to do it. It's one thing to do it in a song. So the first thing was the excitement of getting through it without cracking or yelling or screaming, without it hurting my voice. The second thing was being able to sing a song, sing notes in a song that I'd never sung before. And so for me, the first one was the F above middle C, and I believe the song was Maria from West Side Story, and at least in the arrangement I was doing, I ended up on the Maria, Maria. Well, I have a video of me singing this for Seth Riggs, and here's what I did. Maria. Well, I was still so excited that I could even vocalize on that note without screaming and without cracking, that I wasn't even tuned in to the fact that I was spreading the vowel, and it was actually, my chest voice was being pulled a little bit upwards. And some of you have maybe seen this video. It's on one of my videos. He says, and so it took that pull of, well, that's within the first 6 months of this technique. 6 months, and I still didn't realize that I was, well, I maybe realized it, but I couldn't hear it and feel it yet, And so I would say probably within the first 6 weeks I was able to get through the bridge, but then to be able to sing it in a song, to an untrained ear, it was fine. No one really cared, but Seth could hear that I was pulling chest by spreading the vowel. All right, so our arc of development is very different. Now, I don't know that that's average. I don't know if it's above average, but it wasn't long ago, a couple of years ago, I found a video online, and I've shared this too in some of my videos, where Pavarotti is being interviewed with Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne. And he begins to explain how to be a good tenor, you've got to be able to sing the F, but he has to learn how to cut. He calls cover. We would learn how to mix. And he said, for example, and he gets on the piano, he says, and it was like, wow, that sounded great. But he said, that was okay. He said, that was fine, but it wasn't elegant, he said. And then he did this note, this explosion of sound, and he said, now that sounds pretty simple, but take maybe 10 years, he said in his Italian accent. 10 years for Pavarotti. So, I mean, what's the timetable on his arc of development, right? So this arc of development is a mystery. What's probably the number one question I've asked as a teacher of other teachers who were trained by Seth Riggs and are really highly skilled in speech level singing, and I've asked Seth this question myself: how can we speed up this process? And so it's because I would say I was able, and because I did several roles let me see, how many years ago I did Perone in Evita, and he's got some really insanely high notes. He got a high C in one. It's not a sustained high C, but he touches on the high C. It's really fun. A very dissonant moment with Evita, and it's just exciting. So I mean, I could get up there, and I sang. I played Captain Coqueron in HMS Pinafore, and I think the note that we sang, I had an A flat in that one. And so I was able to do it, but it wasn't until about 4 years ago in a lesson that it kind of clicked for me as to what I was, how could I reproduce it? How could I maybe gain a little more control over it? And so again, it's this arc of development that things, you go through these different experiences, and one day something clicks and you feel something different. So I'm going to share again with you what my last bit of progress. Again, this is about summer or fall, summer of 2011, and mind you, that would be like about 14, 15 years into this technique. I don't think I'm that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm above average or below average, but what I learned from that experience was that I was kind of squeezing a little bit, and as soon as I got rid of the extra squeeze, then some good things happened. Now I don't know. I haven't warmed up today. My voice has been a little bit scratchy from. We're in winter here, and so the heater is dry and so forth. And I live in a desert. Excuse after excuse after excuse. Mum, 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 mum. And I was doing these mum-mums. Mum, 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 mum. And all of a sudden, I just kind of felt this like something like kicked into overdrive. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 and I came back down and mum, 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 and I said, "What happened? I know something happened, but I don't know what it was." And my teacher at the time, Greg Enriquez, I was taking this lesson from Greg, and he said, "Well, you finally let go of that extra squeeze that you've had on the chord structure. And then the rest of the chord structure kicked in. You notice there's a deeper quality now." I didn't even understand what he was saying. I listened for 2 months because I knew, and I said, "I wish I knew how I did that." And so we worked on it the rest of the lesson. It was still a mystery to me after I completed the lesson. And I listened to and practiced that lesson for another 2 months, 2 to 3 months. And I started to realize, I started to hear what I had felt. I could hear it on the recording, and then I could hear it, and I could do it with my voice while I was listening to my lesson. And then I would record my lesson again and listen. And say, "Oh yeah, I did it. I did that sound that I'm hearing. I just did it again on the recording." So I almost feel like I need to apologize to the world. But it takes that much work for me to get things sometimes, to really understand. I mean, maybe I was doing it periodically throughout the years because I was performing plenty, but it was kind of like an accident, or it was like I'd say, "Well, I was in good voice tonight. Wow, that was nice. Wish I could do that every time." But for me, it took me several months of listening to the very lesson to and practicing it and recording me doing my lesson again and listening to what Greg had to say and feeling it and so forth. And then I began to realize, through some of the explanations also, that for me it ended up being a two-step process. I do not pretend to suggest that it's going to be this way for everyone. But I've had this with ladies, for some of my students, it seems to work for them, and certainly for some of my men, but not always. and it's elusive. Even now, it's possible for me to get a little bit more tension. Maybe the larynx is a little up, and so it's just not quite there. So for me, the beginning point is no tension. And so one of the things that I've discovered, really, we didn't even do this exercise, but this is a very good exercise to do to isolate the vocal cords, which is right here below, right behind the larynx, right behind the Adam's apple, to isolate it from the external muscles so that there's no tension on it. Goo, goo. Let me see. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. Now, if I can do that and do mum-mums and no-nos without any tension, mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum, mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum-mum, get it nice and release coordination. Then step number 2, which is almost instantaneous, is that I need to lean down or lean into, and this is a very ambiguous term, leaning onto it. The closest thing I could say is maybe increase the airflow a little bit. I'm not saying grab the cords and press into it necessarily, but somehow increasing the velocity of air that's moving past it. Very difficult to explain. I'll try and show you. If I do that simultaneously, just after I get this feeling of release, then I can kind of get this ring ping, and there's some physical feedback also that I sense and can feel. So it sounds something like this. Okay, so step 1 is try to do that with, like I did the goo-goo, with no tension at all. Step 2, in the very next moment, almost simultaneously, press down or send more airflow into that feeling of release. That's a bunch of mumbo jumbo for most of us. But if you begin to experience it, then you start to kind of sense what I'm talking about. Mum, 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 mum. And so another way of being able to show this is to do a crescendo on 6 notes. Watch. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Now, the bad news is sometimes when I try and do that, it doesn't work. I really have to come at it. I really have to come at it from the feeling of letting go, of release, of not squeezing, of not pressing down into it. So I have to first think of this release, this let go, not falsetto, but just let up on any kind of push or pull or squeeze, and then when almost the instant there's that release, then press down into the condition of the release. How's that for a mystery? Now, but what it did do is started to give me a sense and a feel for what it feels like up. Now you may notice, gentlemen would notice this sooner than the ladies. I'm actually above the first bridge. I'm not in the first bridge. I'm working above the first bridge. And in this case, pretty much the A and the A flat, A and the A flat, actually, correction, the A is the beginning of my second bridge. So the A flat and the G are just above my first bridge and just before the second bridge. So to go back and maybe correct myself one more time, I was in my second bridge when I began to feel this release. And I think the reason why is because I was so high I couldn't really squeeze it that much. It's not that I knew what I was doing. Now, what's exciting about it is that I started to feel it, and then we took that feeling down into the first bridge. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. That's E flat, hardest note in the world. Mum, 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 mum. Now that's not just chest voice. Mum, 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 mum. You can hear the difference. So I was able to bring that that feeling that I discovered in the second bridge down in through to the first bridge, which is the hardest area to sing at first, especially. And then by just working that, becoming familiar with that feeling, then all I have to do is think about reproducing that feel every single time I vocalize. So now in the question that Ricky answered, I think it's Ricky. Sorry, Ricky. He wanted to know, well, what about going up into the C and the D? Well, it's all the same. It's in a mix. It's in a blend of chest and head, and it's primarily head voice by the time you get up through the second bridge. Mum, 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 that's the A. And ladies, that's your first bridge. Mum, 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 mum. Again, the secret is don't try and push it. Think release and then press in. That's the high C. Mum, 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 mum. Mum, 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 mum. That's the high D. Mum, 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 mum. Okay, well, so I'm sharing with you how it occurred to me. But the answer is it's possible. I hope that it's not, that doesn't mean you have to, it takes you 15 to 20 years. But on the other hand, here's Pavarotti, who was a consummate professional all his life, working on his voice all of his life. I first learned how to go through my bridge when I was 43 years old. That was 20 years ago. Yes, I'm 63. You know, so I guess you could say I had a late start, and I had another career. This is the thing that brought real joy into my life and excitement and like this miraculous experience of, oh my gosh, I can get to the bridge. And then, 15 years later, now it doesn't even sound like I'm in a bridge. Now it just sounds like it's all one voice. And that's how. And so there's an arc there. It wasn't until, it didn't take 15 years to vocalize there. It just took 15 years to really start to feel and understand what was going on and what I was going for. So now, everything that I've shown you, the idea is it took maybe it has to take 15 years. And so a lot of times the answers I get from some of the teachers, it takes as long as it takes. And it's like the old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Well, when the student is ready, the lesson happens, or something like that, Okay, so that's my long story. It is possible. And I was going to share a story about, I remember an audition I had, and we were down, there was like 5 guys on stage, and they had us singing an A, something from Music of the Night from Phantom. And I remember, Ricky, singing something like, B. It's supposed to be forte or fortissimo. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't press into it. And now, probably about 15 years later, At least I can press into that. Well, there's an arc of development. It takes as long as it takes, but maybe this will help. Okay, so let me go through some of the questions here. Thank you. I can see there's some discussion going on. Let me just straighten this out so I can kind of see what's going on. Will you be answering questions from the comment sections from here? I do have a question I really want to ask you. Well, I'm going to answer them from this discussion that we're on. When I'm training na or mum, I always hear rattle. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I have to say that I'm not sure what it is. It's a double. There's another pitch going on, and sometimes I hear it in my own voice, and other times I don't. I'll have to get back to you on it. Maybe one of you know the answer to that. If you do, let me know. But I think it's a double pitch, something happening on the chord structure level. And I can even hear it when people do bubbles. I can hear another pitch going on. I'm curious, do the vowel modifications take place in the nasal cavity? No, the vowel modifications occur with the tongue. So, and somewhat of the shape of the inner mouth. But it's primarily the tongue that gives you more or less of the modifications that you're experiencing. You can count the lips a little bit too. So if I said no, I'm not moving my tongue, but I am narrowing the O to oo. Yeah, as an aside French equivalent, or do you close that off with a soft palate? So yeah, if you said, I could close my soft palate and say, but I don't know that that's the ideal way to create that sound, because you're closing your soft palate and it's going into your nose. So the French, ooh. So if you said O on the outside and with oo lips, there are other ways to do it than I believe than closing the soft palate. But I'd have to get back to you to describe exactly how to do that. Okay. Let me get some other questions here. I had the mixed voice and could practically yell in it. It was so open and free. Then I didn't sing for a while and came back to it and mix was gone. Well, welcome to singing. It's elusive. So one of the things you have to do is go back to the beginning and make sure that you were actually in a mix. Maybe you weren't in a mix. Maybe you were just yelling. Chest. I don't know. And for me to comment, I can't really tell you. But it takes a little bit of time to begin to identify the feel of all of this stuff, the feeling of mix. And I certainly couldn't at the very first. I mean, I attended this 2.5-day workshop with Seth Riggs early on. I'd been doing this about 6 months, and my ear still wasn't tuned in to mix. It took me, I'm sorry to say, it took me several years, and I don't want you to get discouraged, just to hear what it was and to get used to the feeling. Hello, can you give us an idea how to get operatic power and operatic sound? Well, hopefully, Edward, this is going to help. But the opera is also is a low larynx kind of a sound. So if on every fundamentally the technique is the same, but if I were to say the voice had to be biased one way or the other, it wouldn't be bratty. It would be It'd be this lower larynx kind of position and coordination. It's a little bit more legit. And that then combined with what we've talked about today, will move you closer to the operatic sound. I've experienced the same sometimes, but never been able to do it in a song. I understand. Try scrunching your nose like a rabbit and make that little smile like a Cabbage Patch doll. I'm not sure exactly what a Cabbage Patch doll looks like. I'm not sure if I would want to sing with a scrunched up nose. I dragged my chest voice up to the D sharp 5 today. It was just experimenting. Okay. Tadius. So hopefully you didn't hurt yourself. If you dragged chest up, if I did that, I would probably be bleeding from my vocal cords. Yeah, so in my technique, I don't tell people to lift the soft palate. I don't tell them to scrunch their nose. I don't give them any direction like that, because if I tell the person to flare their nose, I'm not exactly sure how I would flare my nose. I mean, I could do that, but I could just show you, But so the exercises that I teach will keep the larynx down. The exercise, or bring the larynx up a little bit if it's a bratty nay nay nay. The exercises that I give you connect the voice. The exercises that we do cause things to happen in the voice. And so I don't tell people to raise their soft palate. I don't tell them to smile. I don't tell them to raise their eyebrows. In fact, I don't want them to do any of that. Because as soon as you start to do that, you introduce, guess what? Tension. So we don't want tension to be introduced. We don't want to add some other things. And it's very hard to keep it consistent from one student to another if I'm telling them to raise the palate, because it's like, it's describe what muscles you use to. So I tend to always avoid directions like that, because I don't want to introduce added tension. Well, it looks like there's a conversation going on with some of you, and that's great. Is there a question for me here that I get into mix? I found the connection after 8 months of training. I've never sang before, so it took me so long to get it. The only issues I'm having is adding power. I understand. One comment is you can sing powerfully up there, but it's gritty and occasionally cracks, which is probably indicative of a pulled chest, high larynx, because that doesn't happen if we have the right coordination, unless you're sick and your vocal cords are swollen. So, hi, Christina. I see I didn't realize you're from California. Strum Fun. While your teaching exercises and analogies are working wonderfully, thank you for your gift. Thank you. All right, so we've gone 35 minutes, and I don't want to make these so long that discourages people from watching. I really feel like this is a really, really important message today. And it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to get going in our own voices. Any other questions? Okay. Well, if there are no other questions for me, then thank you for joining me. And it looks like some of you are having success with some of these exercises, and I'm very excited about that. So, this is Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing live today. And you can sing higher with beauty, confidence, and power. I know that because at one time in my life I could not. And now I can. And it's 100% absolutely because of this technique that I'm teaching, which I learned from Seth Riggs and some of his teachers, frankly. So, okay, well, hi from Bolivia. I have a raw burning throat from singing from David. Any recommendations? A raw burning throat from singing. Well, I'd have to hear you sing to give you recommendations. If we're singing correctly, we should be able to sing for hours. But there's so many variations on that. If you're on tour and you have to, you're up late because you're traveling, and you go to bed late, then you have to get up early and go to do an interview someplace, and then you have to sing. You do 2 or 3 interviews during the day, so you're talking all day, and you're not eating right, and you're not getting enough water, and maybe you're, obviously you're not sleeping enough, so your voice gets tired out, and then you have to sing the evening away. This is how the professionals, and I'm not one of those touring artists, but this is how they get in trouble. And so if their technique is lousy, then they're going to have hemorrhage. They're going to have surgery. They're going to get nodules. And it happens a lot with the professionals. And it's because they're also smoking and drinking and those kinds of things. They're not taking care of their bodies. They're not taking care of their voice. And they get in trouble. So short of being able to hear what you're doing, we really shouldn't be we shouldn't be having pain after we sing. If we're singing correctly. I don't know of anybody that's singing correctly, unless you're sick. Please tell me how to release swallowing muscle tension. All right. Swallowing muscle tension. If you put your hand on your Adam's apple and you swallow, you can feel it going up. So the first thing I would do is I would say, do the goo-goo exercise. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. Now, if I said, that's pretty much released without tension. If I said, goo, 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 or goo, 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 that's tension. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. Goo, 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 goo. That's release from tension. It's not falsetto, but there's no tension at the external muscles aren't. Okay, so another way to do that is exercises like this. Now, I'm not moving, my larynx is not moving up and down. Very slight, and when I'm really doing it well, there's no movement at all. So that kind of an exercise helps you disassociate the larynx from the external muscles. So goo 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 and a squeaky door exercises on the 1.5 scale. Is it possible to mix up to F6? Well, by the time you get to F6, I've never been up there. So for me, middle C is C4, high C is C5, and so I've sung up to the F5 before, but I haven't sung F6. But by the high C, there's really not much chest voice in it. So if my vocal cords remain connected, then I've got some connection to the bottom, but fundamentally I'm just in pure head voice. So yeah, I'm not in voice today or warmed up enough to hit the F. The neck exercise helps reduce the pulled chest. That's pharyngeal resonance, which I was attempting to convey with the crescendo. Oh, okay, yeah. So And here's the other thing about that Bratty Nay, and then we'll be done. One error that I made early on was too hard. If I said nay, 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 I don't have to do that. Nay, 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 nay. I'm connected. My vocal cords are not pulling up the weight of the chest. They're elongating. I mean, they're stretching. They're the vibrating element. The mass of the chord structure is lighter. So it's not chest. It's lighter than chest. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. So I don't have to do it hard. Just do that nay, 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 nice and easy. You can connect it. You can build that area of connection, and then build on that. Okay. Yeah, Brett Manning learned it from Seth Riggs. Is it better to keep the larynx low by a kind of yawn act, or using fingers to control the digastric muscles not to contract? I think it's very much like yawning. Oh, well, I would try not to use. I just place my fingers there just to see, to monitor whether it's me. I'm not really holding down my larynx, so I don't think you need to hold it down. But definitely the yawn is really low larynx. It's that hooty thing. Ooh. Okay. I have a theory of that, which is that singing with pharyngeal tone before strengthening the falsetto is kind of like pinching thin hose shut. If you lower your larynx, then fine. I'm not sure what that means. You should be able to maintain the twang without a break. Okay, so I'm kind of lost on some of the conversation here, but hopefully what we've talked about today will bring some information in terms of how to develop strength and power above the first bridge. And it's healthy and it works every single time. It just takes a little while to find it. And I think the teacher helps too. But when the student's ready, the teacher appears. All right, thank you very much. You can sing higher with beauty, confidence, and power. I'm Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing Live, and I am out. Thank you.